Today's guest is Rich Waller, a founder, operator, and advisor who's built, exited, and now helps others scale with intention. This conversation covers leadership, vision, and the subtle decisions that quietly define success over time. You've been in business, you've been doing business, you've been leading teams for 30 plus years. And I'm curious if there's a single key takeaway in regards to leadership that you'd like to pass along.
I think leadership was my greatest weakness. My experience in leadership started with myself investing and ultimately buying Foothills Industrial Products. And I realized as I stepped into that leadership position and had a transition from the current owner to myself, I didn't really understand leadership, and I didn't understand how I would get people to follow me. Would it be on the basis of me just saying, hey, I need you to do this? Or was it greater than that? I went through a whole process of trying to understand leadership and how that played out with people, because leadership was on paper and there were so many different thoughts on leadership and so forth that it really was my Achilles heel to start with. I was a hard worker. I could understand the technical aspects. I was great at sales. I could visit with a customer and be successful. But how did I lead people as part of a team to be able to greater success? For myself, that was the emergence of the Entrepreneurs Organization. And that's when I joined EO. And this is back in the early 2000s, where that was my interest and question to my forum group, and really became the theme of my year when I was a chapter president in 2013, leadership. And what I came to understand and really embodied was you have to start with a vision. What is your vision both collectively and individually? And as a leader, you need to have your own piece of that, but you need to be a really good listener, and you need to encompass the feedback of those that have been involved for a good period of time, that have great experience, to help cultivate that vision. You need to set out a plan and be intentional with that plan, and you need to execute on that. And executing on it is in part bringing a vision to life and having your team members understand what that is and everyone's role and responsibility, and ultimately being able to hold them accountable. But for them to understand that they are going to be held accountable, and that accountability could be either very light in the context that an individual gets it, understands it, and achieves what's expected of them, or have to be encouraged. And that accountability goes everywhere from encouraging to having some difficult conversations.
You talked about the importance of the vision and having that going into it, because ultimately that's what a team buys into, is your vision.
Right.
Do you think it's okay for that vision to change along the way?
Yes. All visions are going to be part of an evolution. The best vision is what you see today and what the landscape looks like. But the landscape can change along the way. A vision is dynamic, but I think it always has to have the North Star as its core. Ultimately, what direction are we going in? Because the details of how that vision plays out will change, but the North Star shouldn't. What does winning look like? And in what time frame is that winning expected? With that, it's a calibration process. Do you have enough team members? Do you have the right team members? And are you being reasonable in the amount of time that it's going to take to get there? And are you in control of everything? And recognizing what you're not in control of. Because so often, goals, for example, are set, and those goals aren't completely within your control to achieve. It depends on something else that you have no control of.
What I find curious about that is that people are either overzealous with their goal setting, which makes it, null or obsolete because obviously it's unattainable, or the opposite, and they make it super simple, just a check a box kind of thing.
Right.
When you compare goal setting to, vision creation, do you want to be overzealous a little bit? Like, how do you take into account these different factors that make it either, actually achievable within the time frame, but also motivate people to push?
I think there's a couple of pieces to it. One is goal setting and goal achievement, just like a vision, is a muscle. And you have to train that muscle to understand how do you achieve it and what didn't you understand. More often than not, you don't know what you don't know when you get into some of these visions and execution on a vision. As you really go through that process and define a culture with your team, of what the vision is, how this is going to play out, here's how we're going to execute on it, and this is what success looks like. Great. Now let's get to the next level of this. Ultimately, yes, you have to raise the bar and really get to the point where, you have the big, hairy, audacious goal. Well, really, what is the stretch for you and your team in vision? How do you accomplish things bigger? And I think one of the challenges of entrepreneurs and generally individuals in business is we don't think big enough. If we start to think bigger and start to think beyond the terms of what tangible is right there in front of us, that is pretty easy to capture, what is the next level and what is the 10x of that level to be able to do? And that's where you get into how do you scale from point A to the middle of the alphabet.
Let's go back a little bit. I want to learn about some of your history and kind of how you came into business in the first place. What did your early life look like? Were you into entrepreneurship? Were you into business? And were there any signs along the way that, you might find yourself in the position that you are today?
I had an uncle who was an entrepreneur and a developer, but hands-on in development. Traditional British immigrant background that really took things seriously, right down to how you brush the floor in a construction site and things like that. And he'd said to me one day, when you're a little bit older, I'll teach you how to buy houses on a credit card. And I said, well, how could you possibly buy a house on a credit card? And he says, well, yeah, it's not simple, but we can go through that when you're a little bit older and you have a credit card. We never did quite get to that point, but it was that curiosity of some things can be real in completely different ways than I would have expected. The second piece that it really got me into the more entrepreneurial environment was you come out of university and you say, okay, great. I've got to get a job. I was getting married. I've got to get a career. I've got to be respectable and have an income and really define my place. And I did. And oil field supply company, Dosco Supply was the company then, and it was a combination of Dominion Oilfield Supply Company and a couple other acquisitions. But it got bought by National Oilwell years later. And I'd been climbing the corporate ladder for a number of years, really working my tail off and doing quite well, promoted a number of times. And ultimately, I got to a point of realizing if I'm going to work this hard, I'd rather work for myself than for somebody else. And that was my exit point back to a job that I'd had during university, which was Foothills Industrial Products. And I talked to the owner and asked him, what his succession plan was. He'd said it fell through a few weeks beforehand, and he'd be interested in chatting about succession with myself as he knew me. I'd worked for him for a few years earlier. And we ultimately hashed out a deal of me buying into the company and then slowly but surely taking over the company over the course of 3 or 5 years. He was a wonderful business partner, and I didn't want to let him go quite that quickly because we got along incredibly well. So we went the full 5 years, and I bought him out and then asked if he could stick around. So he sat on a couple of boards that were important for the business and the industry and make his tea times and plan his trips while he still helped mentor some of the team and ultimately contribute to the business in the board areas and things like that. All in all, it worked out to be a really fantastic situation. And during that 3 and 5 year kind of time period, that's when I joined EO and really got the confidence in the business and in the leadership to be able to say, okay, great, let's grow and let's continue on the path that's been really charted and bring that to another level and move on.
It's not every day or every person by any means that would have the confidence to go and ask, their employer, previous employer, whatever the case, what's your succession plan? How can I be a part of that? And this was pre-EO or during EO?
This is pre-EO.
Yeah. What was your thought process going into asking that question? How did you think it was going to come to be? And had you had any experience, asking those deep questions to people of power, I suppose?
Right. I didn't have any experience. He was an approachable individual. In part, it was, curious about an update about the business. I'm not involved anymore. I've been away for a couple of years, for a few years. How's it going? And what's the plan? I had left the other company and had been looking for different opportunities. And it really was something that I wanted to do in an ownership position, in an entrepreneurial position, as opposed to working for somebody else. And that was one avenue. And you'll look at all the different avenues you potentially have, and it actually worked out quite well.
You mentioned something in there which is really curious, and that is that you identified that you're working really hard, too hard, to not be working for yourself. I want to double click on that because I think there's a lot of people that feel like they're working really hard and, maybe they have the ambition to start a business or they're not quite sure what the next step is, but in general feel like they're working really hard and maybe there's more for them. My question is, do you feel like entrepreneurship can be for everybody, or is there certain traits and that sort of thing that are required to be successful in that field?
I think you really need to look deep and understand whether or not you're willing to commit in entrepreneurship. Working hard is one aspect, but being responsible for other people, incomes, livelihoods, and so forth, and working hard is the real challenge. And I know you know that as well in what you're doing. It is something to take seriously and really understand if you're going to do everything you need to do or think you need to do to commit to that. One of the things that you get into with EO and other business support organizations is the idea of working smarter, not harder. Well, yeah, I completely agree. Hard is considered time. Hard is considered output. It is considered achievement and so forth. That's great. No problem. But you can go farther with a team than you can with yourself. And so if you're in a corporation, for example, are you leading a team in that corporation? What management experience, what leadership experience have you got there? It gives you some feedback before you take the risk of owning that and having debt and having commitment to other people of how you operate, understanding your own style, understanding how people respond to you. Is it because they have to or because they want to? And that is a very difficult calibration to get to the heart of. And if you're doing this yourself with your own ownership, is it those same people that are going to come with you, or is it going to be a completely new team? And then what are the skill sets that you don't have with that? One of them is human resources. One of them is hiring. Did you ever hire any of the teammates? You might have interviewed them as part of the hiring process, but was it just you? And it's all these different pieces that all of a sudden, when you are the entrepreneur, that you realize you're taking care of the human resources, you're taking care of the accounting, you're taking care of the sales, you're taking care of the operations, you're taking care of all these pieces that, generally speaking, you weren't an expert in when you started. So do you hire for those places that you're weak in? And what does that look like? It's a real complex latitude that you need to consider with going into entrepreneurship. But there's also, organizations like EO and others that help entrepreneurs recognize those weak spots and what to do with those weak spots.
When you're looking at a business, whether it be from a board position or ownership or whatever the case, what are some of the questions that you ask yourself when you're getting ready to scale that business?
Really start with, are you at capacity? In other words, is your team doing everything that they could be doing to the capacity of the organization right now? And what's next? Is it buying another company to expand your market, or is it growing organically, which may mean, which was the case for Foothills, was adding more people and adding more product lines, and understanding which product lines and which people in which roles. Was it administrative help or was it sales help that was required? And so part of it is understanding, are you getting everything that you should be out of the company, the organization right now? And if you're going to add, what is the most important next hire that you add?
The most important next hire, I think that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Have you ever made a mistake in regards to the most important next hire?
Hiring is one of my weaknesses. You bring an employee into your business and you end up spending all day with them, the whole business day with them and all the rest of it. And it's based on a number of rounds of interviews, a number of questions, a verification of technical experience. There might be some testing as part of that experience working and so forth. But at the end of the day, you have spent a very short period of time with saying, okay, great, this is a person I'm going to spend 8 hours a day, 5 days a week for the rest of my life. I dated my wife for 5 years before we got married. I probably, during the time when I was busiest in business, spent less time with my wife than I did with the employee that I hired last week that is going to be the person I spend more time with. How do you do your best in setting somebody up for success? That's the real piece of leadership. It's not necessarily about making you successful, but how do I make you, the new person, successful? How do I onboard that individual? How do I train that individual? How do I bring them into the culture? How do I set them on the right path? And how do I effectively launch them into the business, into success, and make them a vital part of the business along the way? And I learned early on that just adding a body wasn't going to work, because they didn't have much guidance. They didn't have much understanding of how this company works or how this market works. They might have been great at sales, but they have to learn the technical aspect of a product to sell and so forth. You had to make the time, or you had to make a team member's time available to train this person and be really intentional about that. And what does that look like? We got to a point where we had an entire process of how we onboarded someone. And 6 weeks to onboard, 6 months to get up to speed, and the next 6 months to effectively accomplish what was hoped and expected of that individual for their first year. And this was communicated as part of the interview process. This is how we do things. And part of the questions was, what's been your experience in the past? And how do you learn? Is it visual? Is it written? Everybody learns a different way. And so if we say, this is the way we teach, that might not be the way a person learns. And so how do we short circuit that and make sure that the learning is on track with how we deliver that onboarding piece?
That's really interesting too to me that, you ask about their learning style. Let's say somebody is a really strong candidate and that you really want them in your team, and maybe everything is great except their learning style, as far as you like to teach and they like to learn, doesn't align.
Yeah.
Have you ever changed your teaching style or attempted to so that you could, engage new talent?
Yeah, and I think that's an ongoing learning for myself and for anyone else that was in those roles. One of the first attributes we look for is how good of a learner or how good of a listener was this individual? Because learning is about listening. Learning is about listening to understand as opposed to listening to respond. Is that the case? From there, can they communicate how best they learn, or communicate questions and a little bit of vulnerability of saying, I don't understand. Can you go through that again? Can you back up? I just can't make that connection between this and this. And we've already gone down the path here, but there's a loose end there. Can you help me understand that? Our learning was going back and understanding what loose ends were we leaving along the way. If we're blasting down this path of onboarding and saying, okay, you got to do this, this, what were we missing along the way? And could we be more thoughtful about how we bring in those other attributes? Because 8 months from now, they're going to figure out that, there's something in the market that I didn't really understand when we did the onboarding, and now it's coming back to haunt them, so to speak, which means they got to come all the way back to the learning here to go back all into that place to be successful now. It was a challenge to not be very overly complex, but thorough at the same time.
It sounds like, and this is something that you mentioned earlier in our conversation, that curiosity was a key driver for you. But it also sounds like, if I'm making the connection accurately, curiosity based on the way that they listen, the way that they engage in the interview process, the way that they learn ultimately, and your curiosity and how you can learn or teach them better would create a successful relationship.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a level of curiosity that I hope everyone brings to the table. The greatest challenge in hiring is that we generally like to hire people that are a lot like ourselves because we get along with them really easily. But that may not be what the business requires. But at the core of any business, you need to have curiosity. You need to have an investigative mind to understand what's next, what's better, or how can I do this differently? And that curiosity, I think, just takes people a long way.
Separating self from business. I think that might be related maybe to the scaling kind of question earlier.
Yeah.
But you just identified that, and that's really curious. I'm thinking about the ability to separate oneself from the business, whether it be from a CEO position or otherwise. What is the importance of that, and how does it affect the team?
Self and business, I think, is very difficult now because we're incredibly connected. We're on our phones all the time. Emails come in all hours of the day, instantaneous text messages and expectation of response and so forth is all ours. How do you put that away? How do you step away from that? And one of the challenges is actually turning off your phone or leaving your phone behind, stick it in the glove compartment while you're driving and just have windshield time. And allow your mind to go anywhere your mind is going to choose to go. And it's going to go to the place that is most important right now. That might be business, that might be personal, that might be something beyond. It might be friends, the golf trip or something like that. The reality of it is you need your mind to have clarity from time to time. And, there's some programs that say, well, you need a clarity break. Yeah, I get that. But really, it's your time, your place, and choosing to do that on a daily basis or at least on a weekly basis to have a period of time where you just clear everything and say, okay, great, I'm going to let my mind go wherever it is. In business, it allows you to go from working in your business to on your business. In life, it allows you to separate business from personal, business from family, and allow you to have life. Reality is, especially younger age, when you're working your tail off and you're really trying to create something or accomplish something, what takes the brunt of that? And often it's family. Well, family can be a young family at that time. And if you don't put time into that family, and I say time because it is about time, and if you can't separate the two of those, that's where things are out of balance. And one of the things that you really get to early in business and in life, because all of it's connected, is how do you find balance? Balance is not an endpoint. It's not that I achieve balance. That's great, because the next day that balance goes completely out of whack. And so how do you know that you're spending more time here when you should be spending more time here? And that's conscience, that's your life calling you. And how do you separate the two? And it's not necessarily that you can totally separate the two, but you can separate them enough to be able to say, I'll finish my day at 5 or at 5:30 and go and spend time with the family. And I'll look at my phone, but I won't look at it until 8 o'clock at night. And I'll just put that away type thing, right? The other thing is you realize that the beginning of the day is an opportunity. I think you have to stay healthy. I think you have to have activity in your life, because I grew up with a mother that always said a healthy body was a healthy mind. And so if you want your mind working as well as it can, you've got to be healthy. And to me, that was sports, that was exercise and all the rest of it. That all of a sudden became morning. And that was getting up earlier and getting a workout in before my day and feeling good during the day. It was trying to understand what gives you energy as opposed to what takes away the energy and spending more time with that. Well, family ends up giving you a lot more energy than business does from time to time.
This idea of balance and time management, I'm really curious about. And I love what you said about how everything's connected. How does one find their own balance? Because realistically, it is always different, right? Some people are going to need to give a little bit more to family or personal, or, some people can give 100% to business, and that is their balance, and that's okay.
Totally. Yeah.
So in your experience, how do you find that balance within yourself?
Trial and error, I think, is a big part. When a business opportunity comes up, you know that if you don't jump on it right away, you're going to lose this, and this is something that's really important. If that's always the case, you're going to lose what's not in business, because this is where your time is. One of the most interesting statements that was made to me in my leadership journey is keep track of the time that you spend on everything you do. And once you understand what you spend all your time on, now you can understand what you consider to be important, because importance is where you spend your time, not what you say is important. Say family is important, that's great, but how much time do you spend with family? Or how much time do you spend with yourself? How much time do you spend with your friends? Too much? Is that not enough? Is there something missing that you need to be conscious of to spend a little bit more time? And that's the trial and error piece. Oh, my kids are this age. This is an important time. I need to be at their soccer games, their hockey games, their volleyball games, what have you, right? How do I make this all work? And planning and getting an agenda laid out for your day and actually sticking to your agenda was super important for me and my learning. You can always change what you're doing at any given time, or how much time you're giving to something in particular, and those priorities change throughout life. Understanding what it is and what you're doing now and how you're feeling. Do you feel good? Are you sleeping at night? Or do you feel as though you should be doing something more somewhere else along the way, right? If it's business, for example, part of it is building your team out. That's where the working smarter as opposed to working harder comes in. If your business can financially afford another individual to take on something that you're doing on a daily basis that you don't need to be doing on a daily basis anymore, then that's a good investment that now liberates a whole bunch of time for you to do other things that you have reprioritized.
We've mentioned EO several times throughout the conversation, and most listeners are no stranger to that. So we've had several EO members on. But I'm curious about your journey. I know you started in EO, you said in the early 2000s. I know you were the president in 2012, 2013 of Calgary chapter. And then you moved on to global. And so if you can kind of summarize your experience and what made you so bullish on EO in general to take it to, the global level.
Learning is the foundation of all of that. And I'm a lifelong learner. I thrive on learning. And the steeper the learning curve, the better for me. And EO always provided that. And when it went beyond the chapter into regional all of Canada, you started to meet people in different regions that were doing the same business, but differently. And differently was because the economy is slightly different, taxes are different, regulations are different, what have you, right? And they are across borders, provincially, and then nationally as well. I went from the chapter president to the regional council and ultimately ended up being the regional chair for 2 years for Canada. And it gave me a good understanding of entrepreneurship in Canada and our country. What are hotspots for that? And what does that look like in Quebec, for example? What does that look like in Atlantic Canada compared to BC or Alberta? And it was interesting because there's different places that encourage entrepreneurship more than other places. Capital cities, for example, are more working for government kind of cities and less entrepreneurship. Cities that are not capitals are generally have more entrepreneurship and opportunities that play out based on their region and solving a problem that is local to them. Well, when you went beyond the region into global, and I joined the global board in 2021, it was the same thing internationally. And that really spoke to me because it was different businesses in different countries, different economies that were both because of what they saw locally, but they saw internationally. And what I appreciated in most countries that I visited, and this is from Latin America, South America, to Europe, to Africa, to Asia, is most countries look at export more than Canadians ever look at export. And we look at import, and my old business was all import and serving the domestic market. They would look at what is our opportunity not only locally, but internationally. And one of the things that defined what their opportunity was what is their cost of production. You'll look at minimum wage in different parts of the world, and that was the one question I asked everywhere I went. What is the minimum wage? What do you pay your employees on the shop floor and so forth? What does this look like? And what is a good income for an employee in a particular place? And it was fascinating because those that cared about the livelihoods of their employees, although it may sound like a very small dollar of what they're paying them, kept those employees, and it truly was about team everywhere you went. And what is your team? But it went from a startup team that's hit sort of the entry point into EO to family businesses that this is a third or fourth generation in the family business, and it's a massive company in salt production or in ceramics or in textiles or what have you. And what does that look like in a family environment and coming through to be the next generation to take it to the next level again? And you have a lot of family members dependent on you. Very different. And so the learning was not only about the businesses and why they work in some countries and not in others. What is the difference in leadership? What is the difference in organizational structure? What is the difference in strategy? And I say strategy because we often look at strategy as very short term, 1 year, 3 years, 5 years. Whereas in Europe and in parts of Asia, especially in family businesses, they think in 10 years, 15, 25, and 50 years, where they're thinking about the generations, because now they've figured out how to bring generations through the business into leadership and so forth, how to send them off to get educated, how to bring them back, how to start them on the production floor and bring them up through leadership, and ultimately hand the keys over to them at some point in time. And when is the right time to hand the keys over? And were they a part of that strategy formation that is 25 years down the road, which is now only 15 years away or 10 years away? And how does that work? And the responsibility for them to update the strategy for the next 25 years. That was all really fascinating. And what does that look like in North America? What does that look like in my own businesses and in my family and so forth? Thinking longer term is definitely a part of it.
Do you think that perspective that you gained from that global experience is something that anybody operating a business in North America would benefit from?
Part of understanding what your opportunity is to get out of your own domestic market and understand whether or not there's other people doing it in other markets and what kind of feedback can you get from them. So that might be acquiring another business in another market and understanding what other opportunity exists with that, right? Can it be more profitable? Is it a harder operating environment? Is there a lot of government regulations in particular areas? Or is there less? Is there a high tax? Part of scaling your business is understanding where your business is going to be located. There's both the operation of the business, but where your business is located. And you get into a little bit more complex corporate structures or tax structures or what have you, to be efficient. I mean, one of the things that we always have at the basis of business is how can you be the most efficient? How can you be the smartest? And how can we grow this so that we can take advantage of the opportunity that's in front of us? And in front of us is anywhere from down the street to around the world. And at some point in time, you got to start thinking about around the world. That's where we need to get more global than we have in the past. I think in North America and certainly in Canada.
population-wise in general, why would we be thinking so small scale, when we have a tenth, if not less, than the population of these other countries that we could be doing business in?
There's a few factors that come into play that I've picked up on over the years. One is the US moves a lot faster than we do. And faster is allowable in a market where you have runway. And you can move faster in that market for that runway. If there's a ton of runway in front of you, that's great. Population is a big piece, your consumer market. Our consumer market is smaller. We're a tenth the size of the US, generally speaking. But the rest of the world, for the most part, outside of Europe, especially Latin America, Africa, Asia, move even faster than the US does. And I put it to you this way, if Louis Vuitton and Chanel and so forth are introducing new fashion, they don't bring it to North America first, they take it to Asia first. Because there's a culture that embraces that and effectively understand what fits, what works, and what's being taken up on before they bring it to the rest of the world. And so what is your fashion place, so to speak? What part of the world can you identify that does the same thing as you, better, faster, stronger, farther, what have you? And what can you learn from that? Can we move faster in our own backyard? And part of that is we make a lot of assumptions, but do we test those assumptions? And can we move faster? And what does faster look like? Is that more team members? Is that different motivation? Is that a faster moving plan? Is that a quicker cadence? What is it? In my lifetime, we've seen digital really take off from, the internet to social media and beyond. I mean, we're in AI now. And each one of those iterations is pretty fascinating. How do you accelerate with each one of those, right? How do you further your opportunity on new platforms? And how quickly do you adopt them?
On the topic of AI and tech in general, how are you utilizing these technologies in your businesses to give you the upper hand?
A lot of the work I'm doing now is consulting work with businesses. And the questions that I'm asking are, what are your processes? How good are you at your processes? Because generally speaking, business is about people, process, and cash. And there's no such thing as a perfect business. And which one of those is your greatest challenge? So how can you use AI in hiring? How can you use AI in your processes? And how can you use AI in your cash, right? Information is a big piece of it, for certain. But I think the greatest opportunity is in communication and in process. And how can you short circuit a process by using AI? And how can you get automated communication that you're happy with, that is your voice, that is taken care of on a much quicker, much more automated basis to be able to do that, whether it's by email or reply emails or what have you. It can save you time, but you can be better because of it. And so picking the right tools and understanding the tool for the application is the most important. There's so many agents out there now that do you have the right agent for the right purpose? And is it working? Because so much of AI is training your AI and making sure that it works exactly how you intend it to. And actually going beyond that and understanding how it can be better than you even expected.
It's really about critical thinking, right? I think the default is that people are just assuming that it's going to, do everything perfectly for you and there's no moderation required or whatever the case. And I mean, like anything else, it requires critical thinking to determine how does it fit in the business and how do we proceed with it too.
Yeah. Did you just create another problem by implementing something that, kicking the can down the road or what have you? Are you accomplishing what you hope to accomplish because of it? Yeah, very true.
Yeah. You mentioned consulting. You started Holler & Co. in 2022, and it sounds like you've got something else exciting coming down the pipe. Why the transition, or I'm sure you were doing this kind of previously as well, but why in 2022 was the right time to start consulting?
I had exited my operating company, Foothills Industrial Products, in 2020, just before COVID. I had started Saltex Solutions, another operating company, in 2017, and we launched that. 2017 was the planning. 2019, 2020 is when we became operational. We literally launched it right into COVID. And so that was tough for that business, but ultimately we've gotten through it and we're still existing there, but I'm not operationally involved in that business. With my time on the global board for EO and learning so much about business in different places, I looked at consulting and said, you know what, I can bring a lot of help to different businesses. Business in general, and then business specifically in the energy sector. So I launched Waller Co. with the intent of really helping businesses either get off the ground, get turned around coming out of COVID and get back on the right track, and then how to scale that business. So much of it is, do you have a strategy? And lo and behold, and we talked about it a little bit before, yeah, there's strategy, but do you actually understand your strategy? Do you implement your strategy? Do you execute on that? And what does that look like? And how do you put a team together? How do you put a high-performing team and get the most out of that team along the way and add other teammates and grow the business to the next level? This was stepping out of the operational side of it and helping businesses execute on their own, giving them support, holding the business and the business leaders accountable as well, be it on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis, or even for that matter on a weekly basis. Defining that cadence so that it worked for them, because cadence for one business isn't necessarily the right cadence for all businesses. You get a lot of enjoyment out of it. There's aha moments for people that happen, but often it's them realizing themselves when they recognize that they could do something differently or something better. Out of the clients that I've built, or clientele that I've built in this short time, it's been very enjoyable to see companies get turned around, get back on track, to start to scale and take advantage of that, where we often say, well, the economy isn't great for that, or, that's not possible right now. Well, why did you start this in the first place? Why did you get involved in this? Let's take a look at your strategy and let's take a look at what opportunity exists there. And let's go through the market and understand what that opportunity is and who else is in it and why are they successful? And how do we be successful as well? It's been really, really interesting. Some are very traditional that are adding a very new digital and AI piece to it in a world that doesn't really embrace that, all the way to how do you take advantage of opportunity that comes because of a policy change, be it in the city or in the province. And now how do you accelerate?
It sounds like everything we've discussed so far is kind of led you to this point where, your experience in your own companies, your experience with EO Global and those learnings that come from that perspective have led you to this position where you're a perfect fit to consult for these different businesses and your clientele. Nonetheless, it's still a big change to go from operating to consulting, right? So I'm curious where your personal fulfillment comes from in the work that you do every day. Is it kind of seeing these clients of yours succeed? Where does that come from?
It is. That's exactly it. Seeing them succeed is the big deal. The interest and the curiosity is seeing all the different businesses. I love business, and being able to get into each one of them and peel back the covers a little bit to understand what is the real challenge that exists here and how do we help solve that? How do we help clear the hurdles for this team to succeed? And be it leadership development with a leader, to organizational design or redesign, to execution of strategy, of goals, of an annual plan or what have you, seeing them succeed, seeing them operate differently. What I do with every client is take a baseline. Here's where we are today. And this is what I understand. And so I'll spend the better part of a week listening to the leader, listening to the business, listening to what are the challenges that are going on. And from different people in that business, does everyone see the same challenge the same? Or does someone not see that challenge at all because it doesn't matter to them? Should it matter to them? We don't know yet. But ultimately, here's the baseline of where we started. And I think with anyone, with anything, when you see progress from that baseline, when you see that things are slightly better, to a little bit better, to a lot better, to this is a totally different game, everybody's happy, the finances have turned around, we've got money in the bank now, we're going in the right direction, we've never been working better as a team, and we have that alignment, it's pretty awesome to see. And I'm proud of all of the people that I work with, because to say, hey, you know what, I need some help. I'd like to have your input. I'd like to have another set of eyes looking at what I'm looking at every day. What do you see differently than I do? And those are pretty honest conversations. This is what I see with one of your team members. Yeah, oh, but I love that person. I know you love that person, but they're not delivering right now. And that's one of the challenges. Well, how do I get them to deliver? Well, let's go through that process.
Have you ever had a potential client that are, maybe somebody that you're thinking about engaging with or has approached you that just wasn't a fit?
Yeah, I have. In one in particular, I facilitated an annual kickoff session over a couple of days, and it was interesting. It was really interesting. They were a completely digital company, no paper. And so I'd said, okay, that's great, but how do you get reminded of what's important? If you have to go look for it, it ends up being pretty difficult. And so do you put something on the wall? What's your 3-month plan? Mm-hmm. No, we can't do that. We can't put paper on the wall. Okay, I understand. We're hard and fast. So you got a TV screen there and make it digital? Well, that's not a great use of one digital tile, so to speak, right? They were, I think, finding themselves in different ways. They are moving super fast, and they've been successful, and I'm happy for them. But they, I think, still have some things to think about in there. But I can't necessarily help everyone. Yeah. And there's those that want to be helped and those that don't necessarily want to be helped. And if I look at myself, I didn't want to be helped years ago. I wouldn't have gotten a coach. I wouldn't have gotten a consultant. I wouldn't have hired that because I knew everything. I didn't need to have someone tell me I was wrong. I was learning through that whole process that I don't know everything. That I was learning it from a forum group or from learning within EO and things like that. But I was pretty against doing that. And so it's a little bit of full circle for myself to say, okay, now I'm that consultant that's knocking on your door saying, hey, do you need any help? Are things perfect? Is there anything I can help with? Yeah. And what I've learned out of doing this is that, no, I can't help everyone, but let's have a conversation, understand what are you hoping to achieve, and maybe I can help.
Is there ever been a scenario where, somebody approaches you and they know that they need your help, but then the potential solution they're maybe closed-minded to, resistant to, I'm sure that happens all the time, but how do you navigate those kind of scenarios?
Partly in the cadence and timing. If we go through a good understanding of where the business is at and what wants to be accomplished and what the plans are in place for that, I can help with the calibration on that. If that calibration is not what the individual wanted or expected, no problem. Let's let this play out and see how it works. Because more often than not, trying and testing a methodology or a plan and understanding how well it works or how well it didn't work or how well it could have worked is the best learning that can happen for any team, an entrepreneur, or just a manager going through trying to make something better or accomplishing a goal. Being reflective at that point in time, and to me that's the follow-up conversation. How did it go? You said 3 months, let's get back together in 3 months. Are you successful or did you get derailed? And what derailed you? Was it that you weren't in control of everything there and the market went a little bit sideways or the customer just didn't say yes? Those are the things to really learn from.
And it sounds like, the variance in time could be quite drastic from one to another. And from a solution implementation, right? Like some things could be quite quick. Yeah. And some things might take months or years or whatever the case.
And part of it is getting all the information. We're making sure all the information is being considered. And more often than not, the financial side is not being considered. Here's a plan, 3 months. This is what we're going to do. Super stuff. Can you afford to do that? What is the return on cash? What does your cash flow look like? Is it net 30 days? Do you need to put in an incentive for someone to pay in 15 days? Because you need to pay for something a lot quicker than what you expected. And was it the finance side that created the plan? Did it not allow to go as fast as what you'd hoped for? And so how do you manage the cash piece along the way, right? Ambition is one thing. Reality and having a practical plan is another.
If a business is ambitious, if a business is defined as ambitious, does that mean that everybody in the team also has to be ambitious?
Not necessarily. Everyone has a role. The plan can be ambitious. What you're doing can be ambitious. What your intended outcome can be ambitious. Individuals are those that can contribute to that ambition. I went through a purpose process a number of years ago, and it was with EO, and it was trying to identify, what is the purpose of EO? Do we have the purpose right? What do we stand for? What is the character of this organization? And ultimately, what is the outcome that we want to have for a member, for example? As we went through this, we went from the organizational level down to each individual and said, okay, well, what's your purpose? Well, it's a great question to ask yourself, because understanding what is important to you, understanding it might be legacy, but it's probably more than that. What is at the core of what you want to purvey every day, right? This is who I am. This is Rich Waller. And this is my purpose, that I walk and talk and live and exist with it. And getting down to that is pretty hard, because you got to leave ego beside and say, okay, if I leave this over here and say, this is just me, this is my most vulnerable, then what does that look like, right? My purpose is stewardship. And stewardship is leaving something in a better place than you found it. And so I look at everything in my life, in my business, as I talked about the baseline. How do I leave this in a better place than I found it? How do I leave anything I get involved in a better place than I found it? How do we move things forward? Some things fast, some things slow, some things just part of that evolution. And I'll be part of that evolution while I'm involved in it. I identified that as my purpose many, many years ago, but really exploring that and understanding that and saying, okay, well, with everything that I get involved in, do I bring that thought process too? And it had to go through a whole bunch of litmus tests for myself. And ultimately I said, yeah, it is. That's me. That's a me at my core. I've got to leave something in a better place. And so even in my logo for Waller Co., part of it is making sure there's a return on something, making sure that there is an outcome that is more than what you started with, right? And so friendships and so forth, they only grow, right? And so how do you make sure that your relationships in life are constantly going in the right direction? Things like that. Ambition matches with opportunity, which matches with creating opportunity and bringing ambition to it. It's both the energy that you bring to it and the culture that you bring to it as enrollment in that vision, that ambitious vision of this is what we hope to achieve. Who's on board? This is how we're going to do it. Let's go.
What does success look like for you? What do you want your legacy to look like? I'm sure that's changed over the years as well.
Yeah. I've got a good friend who's in the funeral industry, and his dad is a character. And his comment was, you don't want to be the richest guy in the graveyard. And part of that is, how do you bring the most fulfillment to life? And so fulfillment is so many different things, right? I've talked about stewardship. I've talked about learning. I've talked about constantly trying to understand something more, something different, something in a culture. Why does a culture work in a certain way and things like that? And so my happiness is around learning and understanding and meeting and connecting with more people and really learning why everything happens, how it happens, and so forth. How do you set the next generation up? And how do you set the generation up beyond that? And how do you give them the tools and the education and the understanding to be able to do that for their next generation and the generation beyond them? It's not necessarily saying, oh, hey, let's create a family empire here or anything like that. But it's the immigrant mindset that has really founded Canada was, I want something better for my kids than I had myself. And I think that's innately human. we don't necessarily think differently with our kids today, but there is an evolution that our kids have to go through to understand how do they capture opportunity in life and how do they get to a place of happiness? Because happiness is different for everyone and happiness is different at different points in your life. And going through business, being successful in business, exiting and starting new businesses and things like that, the one thing I know is that I'll probably never retire. I'll always be doing something, but there's the purpose part of that, there's the ambition part of that, and there's the legacy part of that. And part of the legacy is setting other people up for success. And as much as I charge my clients for my time and all the rest of it, I'll give my time to the next generation, to younger individuals, to talk to them, to give them help in navigating what is the best way forward, what should I be considering, and so forth. Part of it is the connections that I have. How can I introduce you to somebody that can give you more information in a particular area? I've honestly believed, especially in Calgary and in Alberta, if you have a good idea and you're willing to do the work and roll up your sleeves, there's going to be a lot of people there to support you. Well, I'm one of those people there to support those individuals now. And I love that. I love seeing the success of other people and seeing their ambition come to fruition.
It sounds like, I mean, between, giving to your kids, giving to your clients, even having this conversation for the listeners today is giving back, giving people the tools that they can use to better themselves.
Sure. How do you share your experience so that it's to someone else's benefit?
What's next for you? Where can we send people to follow along?
So what's next for me is another business that I'm in the process of launching with two other individuals. It's called Energy Advisory International, or ENAI. So you can look that up. It's a .global because we intend to have a global reach for this consulting business. It is consulting in the energy sector. It's educating in the energy sector. It is really having people understand the importance of energy. And I say energy across all forms of energy, from solar to wind to oil and gas to nuclear and so forth, how important energy is to our lives and such. Recently became the chair, along with my wife, for the Canadian Energy Executive Association. That's formerly known as the Oilmans, and it's the 75th anniversary year. And so Jane and I are going to have fun rolling out that year and celebrate 75 years in energy and the network of everyone that's involved in energy. Mostly local, more so Canada, and it has been North America, and we're bringing North America back together again on that 75th year. Outside of that, I'll continue on the consulting side and have some fun there. I'll continue to travel. Travel now is less about EO and more about personal and culture and so forth. But there's always learning. There's always something to pick up along the way. And in the planning for any trip, what are we going to do that's going to be the curiosity that we can satisfy with it? Seeing the kids grow is good fun. And beyond that, it's about community. And so how do I support the community along the way? It's the fabric of our lives. So community is super important.
Rich, this has been incredible. It's realistically been an absolute masterclass on business. So thank you so much for giving back and sharing your experience. Really appreciate your time today.
No problem at all. It's been a pleasure to have a conversation with you too, Hayden. Thank you.